All right. Well, if you're like me, when you were watching him take a sip of his water, you literally felt like you were going to sip some water. Um, these are very powerful neurons that help us to put ourselves in the other person's position. And so it might help to explain why we get so passionate about our sports team that we're not playing for. And we're actually sad when they lose, or we're actually elated when they win. I mean, who cares? It's not you, right? But no, you can kind of put yourself in that position thanks to mirror neurons and get passionate as if you are, the source of the glory rather than just basking in the reflected glory. When you hear about, when I hear about somebody else stubbing their toe, I immediately I completely can understand what they're talking about, right? Or whenever somebody has a loose tooth, like a little kid has a loose tooth, my husband always, you can see him touch his own tooth with his tongue. You can see it. He's like, nope, my teeth are still here. Okay. Whew. That's why you have those kinds of experiences. And so if you can imagine when you're in a situation and you're having an opportunity to behave in one way or another, your behavior is not just being governed by your own internal personality mechanisms, but also your brain's interpretation of somebody else's mindset or somebody else's feelings of pain or joy or other things. So that's something really important to keep in mind, is that, when we talk about the power of the situation, we're talking about it at kind of a biological level, right? We talked about personality being based on, maybe biology entirely, and we had a whole chapter on that. In this situation, we're talking about your biology may be designed to react specifically to the circumstances, to the, what other people are putting out or what other people are experiencing. And that's really super important. All right. How about the concept of self-monitoring? All right. So, I thought I had the definition written down. I apologize. So the definition of self-monitoring is your awareness or your interpretation of how you are appearing to others. So people who are self-monitoring are thinking to themselves, did I pronounce that word right? Am I smiling too big? Are other people laughing, at my joke and I should keep telling it, or are they looking bored and I should just, let it trail off in the middle, right? Like self-monitoring is referring to your ability, your awareness to monitor the reactions that you're getting from other people. People who are high in self-monitoring, people who are highly aware of the impact that they're having on the people around them, are more sensitive to the social influences that vary across situations. And so a high self-monitor reacts to social influences more. Because they're more sensitive, they are more aware of social influences and are more likely to adjust their behavior as a function of these social influences. So if other people are laughing to encourage them or they're laughing at them, they're going to alter their behavior in different ways across situations, right? As a function of how much high self monitors alter their behavior, it makes it more difficult to really see any stable personality that might be underlying their behavior, because their behavior is going to be more variable across situations. People who are lower in self-monitor are less sensitive to reactions. They're less sensitive to the expectations of other people. And so they may show more consistent behaviors across situations. They're not worried if, they start to, let's say, deliver their speech and, no one's looking at them and nobody's interested in what they're saying. That doesn't cause them to change their behavior. They're like, I am here to deliver my speech and I'm going to deliver my speech no matter how bored you people are. You're going to see that kind of consistency in a person who's lower in self-monitoring. And so imagine if you had a personality theory that had been strictly based on low self-monitors. So you see them always behaving the same way. They are very consistent in their behavior. You would develop a personality theory that implies everybody would behave consistently across situations, when in fact, some people behave more consistently than other people. Low self-monitors behave more consistently than high self-monitors. You could consider a high self-monitor being a little bit more self-aware. You could consider a person who is higher in self-monitor being more self-conscious. right? So self-aware, okay, I'm aware of how I'm presenting myself. This clearly is an advantage. Self-conscious can make you inhibited. So it's kind of a, double-edged sword to be a higher self-monitor. A person who's a lower self-monitor, you have a person who, on the one hand, is very consistent. They're maybe true to themselves. They are going to be who they are. But you also have the potential for a person who's a little bit tone deaf in the context of other people are giving them feedback about the inappropriateness of their behavior, but they're not aware. They just are not concerned with that. And so again, a double-edged sword where it could be a good thing. I'm true to myself. I'm consistent. People know what they're going to get. Maybe you might say they wear their heart on their sleeve. There are lots of pros that go along with being a lower self-monitor, but there are some cons in the sense that they might be insensitive to other people's reactions and stuff. So even as they're being offensive, they're like continuing on, things like that. All right, now something that Sullivan implied at the very beginning of this chapter was the idea that we seek out consistently similar circumstances to allow ourselves to feel comfortable in circumstances. So let's explore that idea a little bit more. How do we seek out? How do we create situations? So the idea here is that we tend to seek situations that help to reinforce our self-concept. And again, I'm going to take us back to middle school. Okay, remember that. That was such a good time, wasn't it? Remember all those awesome times where you never felt bad about yourself at all. It was, that was pure sarcasm, because I'm sorry, that was a hard time because what we were doing in middle school was trying to figure out who we were. And so we tried to fit in with different groups. We tried on different sports or extracurricular activities. We tried on different kinds of clothing. We tried out different kinds of music. We were trying all sorts of things out to figure out who we are. We were trying to figure out our own selves. And as a result, in middle school, we might have looked kind of changeable. We may have behaved in ways that are different than what we ever behaved later. I am lucky that the man that I'm married to and I went to the same middle school at the same time. We didn't know each other then, but we did. And he did never buy a yearbook, but I did. So he has vicarious yearbooks. And so we were flipping through, I think it was 8th grade. And I'm like, wait a second, there's a picture of you running track. And he goes, yeah, I ran track one year. And I said, you don't run. Like, he was a swimmer by the time I met him. I'm like, you don't run. Why were you running track? And he said, well, the coach said I was tall, so I'd be good at it. That's just classic middle school. I don't know what I'm good at. Somebody said I look like I'd be good at something, so I'll try things out. That's really common. I'm belaboring this because I feel like most of us go through a period of time where other people are suggesting ideas for us of things that might be part of our self-concept. But ultimately, we have to struggle through it ourselves. And ultimately, maybe by our 20s or 30s, we've settled into a pretty decent sense of what we're good at and what we're not good at, what interests us and what doesn't interest us, and things like that. And then we're going to find ourselves deliberately and purposely seeking situations that are going to reinforce that self-concept. One of the things about that, though, and like Sullivan said, the fact that we seek out situations that are consistent with our self-concept means that we are going to find ourselves frequently in what appear to be different circumstances, but they really are social situations that are very similar to each other, that allow us to display a consistent self-concept, right? Because we're going to be able to, be basically our same self across the different things that our same self has picked out, right? That our same self likes. So the fact that we seek out situations that reinforce our self-concept makes the social environments and self-concepts appear stable and gives us this apparent consistency. That apparent consistency tells us, see, because that's how I am, or that's how people are. And these are my traits. And this is what, people's traits are. And that really feeds into this general sense that, we have stable traits. Of course, we seek more situations that reinforce the concept, and the cycle continues. My son is looking to change careers, and he really likes what he's doing. It's just there's not much opportunity for growth and development, and so he needs to switch. But there are certain aspects of his career that he really likes because they really reinforce his self-concept. They're really consistent with how he wants to be and how he sees himself. And I think he's worried that he's not going to find himself in another circumstance that would be as supportive of his self-concept, if you know what I mean. And so he's kind of stuck where he is because he's afraid that he won't be able to, be his full self in another circumstance. I mean, the fact that he would rather stay where he is underpaid relative to, where he needs to be, than potentially find himself in a circumstance that won't be consistent with his self-concept, shows you how powerful our selection of situations really is. Like we want to find ourselves in circumstances where we can behave consistently. It's hard work to try and, manage your presentation of yourself in a circumstance that's not really consistent with how you see yourself. It's a lot of hard work. You have to watch what you say. You have to watch your facial expressions. You have to watch a lot of things in order to conform to the situational demands. And it's a lot easier if the situation is demanding what you naturally want to do. Man, that sounded kind of like a trade argument though, didn't it? I'm trying to make sure I'm balancing both things, but all I can say is we do seek out our situations. And a lot of times it's because we perceive ourselves to have really strong traits or consistent traits. And we want those circumstances to be supportive of that. Now, trait consistency at different ages. When we are young, our chart is saying ages 3 to 21. It's really impossible to test the personality of little kids. There's a way that you can test a 6-month-old for extroversion that the researcher is finding pretty decent predictive capability by age 6. But sorry, I hit my microphone. But I wouldn't call it super reliable. So, we'll say between the ages of 3 and 21, the consistency of your behaviors is about 50-50. There's a lot of variation. And honestly, I wish that number at the bottom was a little older. I think 3, you're still pretty iffy. So I wish it said 6. And then I wish the top age on that bracket was 16, because by 16, people are really starting to settle into themselves. But we'll just leave it like that. Okay, fine. About 50-50 consistency when you're young. By the time you've moved into adulthood, and they have adulthood starting at age 22 on this second bar and going through about midlife, 49, it's getting more consistent, right? So you go from about 50-50 to about 2/3 of the time you'll behave pretty consistently. We can predict your behavior with 0.62 confidence in any given situation. So it's getting more consistent as you age. By midlife, 50 to 59, you are fully ensconced. You've probably raised some kids, probably have a job, probably have a bunch of stuff that has really caused you to settle into yourself. And so by age 50, and then probably throughout life, you're going to show a lot of consistency from that point on. About 3/4 of the time, we would be able to accurately predict how you would act based on your personality traits by the time you're 50 years old and older. And you probably have noticed that older people, they get a pass where we go, well, that's how grandpa is, right? So don't try and change him. You're the one who's more flexible now, Mr. 15-year-old. That's how grandpa is. And, you see that older people kind of get a little bit of a pass. And partly that's because they are super consistent across situations to the point that everybody else is like, let's change the situation to accommodate that. Right? So they get to continue to behave however they want. I'm a teeny tiny bit offended because, as I keep mentioning, I am a grandmother, but it seems like nobody ever goes, that's how grandma is, and I just get to be how I am. It seems like that was for my mom's generation. It was for my grandparents' generation. And then it doesn't seem to have extended down to my generation. Like maybe I need another 20 years on me or something before I get to be that, but it's very annoying. I think it's my generation. We always get skipped over. But anyway. All right. Let us wrap up the person situation approach with my self-reflective Gen X perspective. But okay, let's go back. All right. So the advantages of the person situation approach. It emphasizes interpersonal influences to a degree that some of the other theories really haven't done. And so that is an important addition to this approach. It integrates other approaches that had been saying, here, I'm going to explain everything as biological, or here, everything is due to the reinforcements and the punishments you've gotten, or it's just the way that you think about things, right? We've brought it all together in this approach where now we've been able to say it's probably you've got some predispositions, but also you've been rewarded or punished in the past, and you also have these schemas that you've developed. Like it's all coming together in this one approach. It allows us to have different selves apparently in different situations, where maybe in some situations you're the life of the party, other situations you're very quiet and studious, and that's okay because it's acknowledging that the situation is pulling out different aspects of yourself. And another major advantage of this approach is that it's one of the few approaches that really focuses on longitudinal studies, where they study a person from a young age through an older age and see whether they are consistent or not, and those kinds of things. And that needs to be done more in personality theory. How stable are these personality traits and stuff like that. Some of the limits, it's really hard to define the situations like I talked about a little bit earlier. Are these situations the same or do they vary, too much to be considered the same situation? Are they so busy trying to emphasize the role of the situation that they're sort of ignoring some biological influences that might be, always at the heart of everything, right? Like maybe they're ignoring some of it. And then finally, they kind of underestimate the complexity among personality, behavior, and situation as they're so busy trying to say, it's not just trait, let me talk about everything else. Well, there's, personality, these innate traits or whatever. There's the observable behavior and there's the situation. And these are all, it's a very complex relationship. And we can't, I feel like to a certain extent, the criticisms of the trait approach have been acting like the only alternative is to eliminate traits as an explanatory piece, when really you need to include that still. All right. So their view of free will, I always like to wrap up the same way, don't I? So the view of free will probably exists, but it's more limited than like the humanists would argue. Probably there's more of it than, let's say, the psychoanalytic theorists or the behaviorists would argue. So it exists, but it's limited. The common assessment techniques, they kind of use everything. So I just threw everything here, all sorts of different techniques that they might use. Implications for theory. This theory argues that personality can change, but it's going to change slowly. And really, to encourage a change in personality would require a change in situations that would encourage the new version of the personality. And that's where a lot of times in therapy you run into a brick wall, is that you tell the person, in order to move past whatever your issue is, could be addiction, could be, depression as a result of things that have happened in their past or something. A lot of times they don't want to separate themselves from the situations that would allow them to move past the issue. And this person situation approach argues, if you want to have a chance at changing, something fundamental like your consistent behaviors that we call personality, you're going to have to change your situations. So, all right, that wraps up the person situation approach. So I will see you in the next chapter. We're getting close to finishing. This wraps up the second third of the class. Got 1/3 left to go. All right.